Today, we are really lucky to have Matthew Garvey explain the different visa pathways available once you graduate from CIHE. Matthew is a migration specialist and the managing director and founder of Four Corners Migration, which was founded in 1997. Matthew and I met when I was living in South Africa and considering migrating to Australia. In fact, I think that he was the first Australian that I ever met. Matthew really impressed me with his professionalism and knowledge. After we met, I moved to live and work in London while I waited for my Australian residency to come through. Matthew demonstrated his care and empathy by contacting me in London to change the way that we were applying for my residency due to changes in the legislation. This ultimately sped up the process. Matthew didn't need to, but he went the extra mile to ensure my Australian residency was obtained in the most efficient way. I trust Matthew implicitly and rely on him for all my visa and migration legal advice. Please welcome Matthew.
Great. Thanks very much, Karen. Well, hello, everyone. I hope today you're going to get some information about your options once you finish studying. I'm going to run through a presentation, but then at the end, if people do have any questions, we can open it up, and we can talk about particular scenarios. But I really did want to just introduce you to what your options are once you finish studying here in Australia and how you could go about looking to remain in Australia. So, okay, I'm just going to start up a presentation now. Okay, so we're definitely going to be looking at visa options for you and which of the pathways that are available is going to suit you better. Okay, just a little bit of a brief introduction. Four Corners has been around for quite a few years. In fact, 2022, it will be our 25th year that we've been trading. And we do currently have offices here in Sydney and in South Africa. We really do pride ourselves on the service we give to our clients and understanding that no matter how similar, everyone's situation is different and they need a solution that is tailored to their specific situation. Again, the client always comes first on our side, and we like to make that as easy as possible by guaranteeing smooth communication and one point of contact. And particularly in times like we've been experiencing over the last 2 years, when things are very fluid and there are lots of changes, it's important that you've got a source of information that you can trust and that allows you to plan. Now, there are a number of different options that we are going to run through today for you. But one of the key starting points is to be eligible for visas following studying in Australia, you really need to have studied for a minimum of 2 years full-time and then completed your qualification. The areas that we're going to touch on today will be that your options are that you could continue studying after you finish your bachelor degree. You could look at skilled migration, employer-sponsored migration, and then some other options as well that we'll cover. And I think getting your strategy right and having a plan, even if it's at this initial stage, is really important so that you know what you need to work towards. Okay, now the most common steps that students do is once they've finished and they have studied at least 2 years, is that they would look to apply for a graduate visa, which is a subclass 485 visa. This is granted to tertiary graduates for 2 years and has unlimited work rights. One important point to also note is that the Department of Home Affairs, or the Minister, has recently, in fact only a week or so ago, announced that they are looking at making changes to help Australia's economy rebuild from the pandemic. So they have flagged that they are going to be increasing the 485 visa from 2 years to 3 years. All that's been said about that at the moment is from a press release. We don't have any detail or the regulations, but it does sound extremely positive for students that they can get that extra year, because that will open up a lot of options for them. And we'll keep you posted when that does actually come in, but that was some really good news to finish the year, I think, for international students.
So this is for bachelor degree or only for master's?
Bachelor degree.
Also, okay. Thank you.
Yes. So that, as I said, we're still waiting on exactly what that detail is, but it does sound positive. And even for people who are studying trade qualifications, their 18-month visa is being extended to 2 years for vocational studies. So they are really, I think, sending a message that they want to keep international students who graduated in Australia and allowing them to work and to help the economy here. So for those amongst you who think you may study further once you finish your bachelor degree, then you still have at a later stage the option of applying for the 485 visa. You don't have to do it now, because some people would once they graduate may go on to another student visa to pursue other courses. Okay. Now, what happens when you graduate? Within 6 months of completing your course, you need to have applied for your 485 visa. You are going to need a skills assessment for your 485 visa in your nominated occupation, say as an accountant. Now, the 485 skills assessment is a different skills assessment to the one that you would get if you were applying for permanent residence, but it does allow you to then submit your 485 visa application and wait for that to be processed. What actually happens is, if your student visa is coming to an end, but you have applied for the 485 visa, you will then automatically go on to a bridging visa, which allows you to remain in Australia, and you are able to work while you're waiting on that bridging visa until the 485 visa is processed. Now, this can be a good thing, in fact, because it can even buy you more time, because the 2 years or hopefully 3 years that you get on the 485 visa only commences when that visa is granted. So if you then spend some time on a bridging visa, then that is in addition to the 2 or the 3 years. Now, once your 485 visa is granted, what's that going to let you be able to do here in Australia? Well, there's a number of things. You're able to just travel if that's what you wanted to do and look at Australia, and you can take up any employment. There are no restrictions on what work you can do and where. Some people opt to use the 485 to complete a 44-week professional year as an accountant, and other people use that time to start completing the modules that you're going to need to become eligible as a chartered accountant or a CPA. Some of these courses can take longer than 2 years, though, so you need to be aware of this, that if you are remaining in Australia, you must always have a valid visa, and that's what you need to plan for when your 485 visa comes to an end. If you're not looking to study further, you can start working as an accountant right away and start building up your Australian work experience. And again, with reference to someone mentioned border restrictions, what was meant to happen on the 1st of December and has now been delayed until the 15th of December is both for student visas and 485 visa holders, you are able to travel and out of Australia and return without needing a travel exemption. So as I said earlier, these, things are pretty fluid on, as you know, with borders opening and closing. But the stated aim of the government is that on the 15th of December, things will open up, and either on your student visa or on a 485 visa, you are actually free to travel. And in New South Wales, currently, again, these things can change, but currently there's no hotel quarantine, and you just have to do 72 hours of isolation when you arrive back in Australia. So we haven't had any news of changes to that 15th of December deadline from the government. So we are planning that is what is going to be happening. What was meant to happen on the 1st of December, in fact, but hopefully that will continue to be the case on the 15th. So I think watch this space because there could be changes, but we're hopeful that things will open up again to that range of eligible visas on the 15th. Okay, let's now take a look at some of the options that you have once you've got your 485 visa and you're looking to apply for permanent residence and you want to stay further. As I said earlier, there's a number of different options. The first one we can speak about is skilled migration, and that covers visa subclass 189, 190, and the regional visa, that's for people who are prepared to move out of Sydney, which is 491. Now, these three visa subclasses are a points-tested application. You may well have heard all about that, where you are allocated points on your age, your qualifications, your work experience, your English language ability, whether or not you've studied in Australia. You can get extra points for that. You can claim now extra points for if you are single, or if you are married or in a relationship, there can be additional points for partner visas, for partner skills as well. So you need to score a minimum of 65 points to be able to submit an expression of interest. But currently in New South Wales, you really are probably going to need more than 65 points if you're looking to be invited. Because the way it works is you submit an expression of interest, and then that for a 189, that's applying independently, and then they just look at your point score. And it really depends on how many other people have applied in your nominated occupation, which I'd assume would be an accountant, and what point score have they got, because they will only take and invite the people with the highest point score. So that's why it's always important to do as much as you can to maximize the points that you can score. With the 190 visa, the difference between that and the 189 is that it is state nominated. And that means since you've studied in New South Wales and you're living in New South Wales, that you would be applying for state nomination from the New South Wales government. Accountants are on that list for the 190 visa. But again, at the moment, you're needing more, sort of like a minimum of 80 points or more if you're looking to be invited to apply for state nomination by New South Wales. So they're the two permanent residence options. The third skilled migration option is the 491 visa. And that is for regional areas. And how they define regional now is anywhere except Sydney. So that means Wollongong, the Central Coast, Newcastle, even areas of the Blue Mountains. It's just not Greater Sydney. And they are more flexible with your ability to secure that visa. But with the regional one, you're actually granted the 491 visa is a 5-year temporary residence visa. And once you live and work in regional Australia for a minimum of 3 years, you can then apply for permanent residence. So it's a 2-step process as they want you to commit to the regional areas. Now, in New South Wales, each regional development authority or area has their own list of occupations that they are looking to attract. And of those, there's around 9 or 10 of them, and 5 to 6 of them are looking to sponsor in accountants. So for people who are prepared to leave Sydney, there can definitely be options on the regional front. Okay, so that in terms of is the skilled migration is really just something that you guys can do independently, and it's just based on English language ability, qualifications, work experience. One of the other real benefits of the 485 visa is you get extra points for Australian work experience when you apply for a 189 or a 190 or a 491. So the 485 visa is good really on a couple of levels. One, it gives you extra points for work experience, and 2, it can also allow you extra time to improve your English language test scores. So there are ways to use that can then improve your chances of obtaining permanent residence through skilled migration. Okay, let's now move on. Let's now have a chat about employer-sponsored migration. And this, that employers can sponsor you for both temporary residence and permanent residence. Subclass 482 is the temporary residence visa, which is essentially a work permit, and that visa can be valid for up to 4 years. And the 186 subclass is a permanent residence sponsorship with an employer. And there are different ways that you can become eligible for that 186 visa. Now, to take it back to what I was saying earlier about if the government does extend the 485 visa to 3 years, why that is important is to be eligible for a 482 visa, you must have a minimum of 2 years work experience as an accountant to then be able to be sponsored as an accountant by an Australian employer. So what that means is currently for a lot of students, it can be hard. They may just miss out on 2 years work experience with a 485 that's only for 2 years. So if they extend that, what we expect to see is a lot more international students being able to get the 2 years.
You've gone on to mute, Matthew. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I've gone on to mute. Okay.
Can hear you again.
Yeah. What sort of employer can allow it to sponsor?
Okay. You can hear me now, Karen? Okay. Well, look, there's no real limitation on which employers can sponsor, but what they do look at is whether or not that employer is financially stable enough and in a position to be able to employ you. So what that means on a general level is the bigger the organisation, the easier it is to justify that or substantiate it. But even for smaller organisations, it can be done. There can be more questions asked about their financial circumstances and their financial reports, etc., to make sure that they are in a position to really be able to employ you for that period. Because when sponsored, the Australian employer has to pay you at what's called a market rate. So the same as what they would pay an Australian in a similar position. So even on the most basic level, their financial situation has to be able to substantiate paying your salary and keeping you employed. So what we do with employers that are looking to sponsor, we chat with them first. We find out, okay, what's your annual sales turnover? How many Australians do you employ? What's the role that you're looking to sponsor, and what salary do you think you'll be paying? Because on the 482 visa, there is what's called the temporary skilled migration income threshold, which is currently $53,900 plus superannuation, and you can't be sponsored on a salary lower than that. But if the employer employs people in the same role and pays them more than that, then you need to be paid at that higher rate. So that's why they call it a market rate rather than there's just a minimum salary. So all employers, even startup companies, are potentially able to do it. We've helped a number of startups, and then they don't have the track record to show financially, but then we need to include a business plan and financial projections and focus on how they've been funded, etc., to let people know whether or not we think that employer can become a standard business sponsor. Because they
can sponsor any job, or there is a specific job to sponsor?
Well, what they have is there are two occupations lists for the 482 visa. There's the medium to long-term list, and there is the short-term list. The occupation has to be on one of those two lists for you to be able to be sponsored. So there are hundreds of occupations there, but they're all at a certain skill level where you're looking at managers or professionals or trade and technical people. So the lower skilled level occupations cannot be sponsored. So if you're talking about an accountant, that's definitely on the medium to long-term list. So there's no problem. If you're looking at other occupations, then it would just depend on what that was, and we would have to check it off against the occupations list.
Okay. I'm talking about the martial art instructor. Is there any chance of that?
Sorry, could you just repeat that?
This martial art instructor.
Probably not, unfortunately. There are certain sports people that are eligible for 482 visas. But what I can do is actually, let me take a note and I'll double check that for you. I don't think so, but I can let Karen know and let you know, because there are certain sports instructors that can get it, but I'll double check that.
Thank you.
Okay, no problem. So it's a good question about asking about which employers can sponsor, because the 482 process is a three-step process where the employer applies to become a standard business sponsor. Secondly, they nominate a person for a specific position. And then thirdly is when you apply for the visa. So in fact, the first two stages involve the employer more than you. So that's why it is important that when we're dealing with people who are looking to be sponsored, we carry out two assessments, one on the employer to make sure they meet the criteria, and then the second one on the candidate to make sure they've got the right work experience and qualifications for the position. So that's a step that we like to take, just to make sure before we start the process that we know that you're going to get a result. And if there are any problems there, that you find out earlier, so you're not wasting time and money in making an application if it's not going to get you a result. Okay. Now, if we continue on with the employer-sponsored theme, if you are successful from your 485 to then securing a 482 visa, and then if your nominated occupation is on the medium to long-term list, which accountants are, then once you have worked for your employer for 3 years, they can then sponsor you for permanent residence. So that's called the transition stream. So that is another pathway that if you can get the 482, you then work, there then is a pathway through subclass 186 to permanent residence. And we also, though, have clients that get the 482 visa, but while they're on the 482 visa, they actually apply for permanent residence through skilled migration, through a 189 or a 190. You can also do that because the permanent residence application doesn't impact the temporary residence 482. So that's why with our clients, we just like to look at, okay, what combination of these is going to be the best for you and get you the result you're after as soon as possible. So that's why it's always a good idea to, you don't have to just go employer sponsored or just skilled migration. You could check out what is going to work best for you at all times and ideally secure your permanent residence sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I want to ask you one question. So to show the experience, job experience related to anything like IT or something like that, so we need to submit the payslip to government, or what do you need to do like that?
If you're looking to claim work experience, it needs to be full-time work experience or a part-time equivalent. So let's say you're working 20 hours a week for 1 year, then that counts just as 6 months of full-time work experience. Well, that's for employer-sponsored. Interestingly enough, employer-sponsored works off 35 hours a week as full-time. For skilled migration, which is the 189 or the 190, 20 hours per week is seen as full-time work experience. So that can also help students. But yes, generally you need to provide either an employment contract or a reference from the employer and, pay slips, tax returns, etc., because volunteer work doesn't count. It has to be paid work experience as well.
So yeah, I'm a student right now in Crown Institute, and then if I work in the IT field and just working 20 hours a week, that's counted at the full time, or can I get the point from there?
For skilled migration, yes, you can claim points. But what's really relevant here too is what's your nominated occupation for skilled migration? Because if you let's say you graduate and get a skills assessment as an accountant, then your work experience in IT is not relevant. The work experience needs to be relevant to your nominated occupation. So then you'd be making a decision as to whether you're getting a skills assessment done in accountancy or in IT. And that's what you have to really weigh up is, what are the points I'm getting for this work experience compared to other things? So it can get quite specific depending on your circumstances. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Okay. So they're your options. I might go back to the presentation and just see if let me know again, Karen, if the microphone doesn't work. Okay. So then that's, again, we've discussed quite a bit of this already, but you can see there with the, again, skilled migration, different options, as well as employer sponsored. Again, what's currently important at the moment is only occupations that are on the medium to long-term list can be sponsored by an employer for permanent residence. Another thing that was announced in the press release just recently was the government is saying for certain industries and certain occupations that are on the short-term list, they are going to create a pathway to permanent residence as part of the COVID pandemic recovery. Again, we don't have any detail on what that looks like yet or when that will be coming in. But the way the law stands today, your occupation has to be on the medium to long-term list for an employer to sponsor you for PR. And that's after you've done your 3 years through the transition stream. As we touched on earlier, a skills assessment is a very important part of this process. And if we're focusing on the occupation of accountant, that is done through the professional bodies here, be it Chartered Accountants of Australia or CPA, or the Institute of Accountants. So they handle those skills assessment. It's just a paperwork exercise. It's not a practical. But that's a critical part of this process. And as I mentioned earlier, excuse me, the skills assessment you'll get for your 485 visa is a different skills assessment that you need for the 189, 190 or 491. Also, what's very important, you may all have already sat English language tests to come to Australia now on a student visa, but you'll need all English language tests need to be less than 3 years old when we apply for skilled migration. And as your English improves whilst you're being here in Australia, it'll definitely probably be worth your while to sit another test so that you can look to claim more points. Okay. Again, just running through here, with skilled migration, you need a minimum of at least 65 points, but at the moment, realistically, only people with 80 to 90 points are receiving invitations or having their EOI considered. The other benefit of the subclass 190 is if you are state nominated, you get an additional five points for that. And even under the 491, there can be 15 additional points available for state nomination, and that can really help a lot of people. But you have to go to those 5 regions. There are also different streams for the 491 visa for those people who would consider leaving Sydney. And that can do with whether you studied in a regional area, which wouldn't apply to you, but then whether you are employed already in a regional area, or then just people who are looking to move there. So, and they have different requirements depending on which stream for New South Wales you fall under. Okay, let's just touch on some other options for you as well. And what we do see a lot in our office is that many international students come to Australia and they may meet and enter into relationships with Australian permanent residents or citizens. And that means that a partner visa could at some time in the future be another option for you. You would have to meet the definition of a partner, and that is either by being married, by being in a de facto relationship, which is where you've been living together for a minimum of 12 months, or in New South Wales, you can also register your relationship, which is not a marriage, but it is a civil recognition of the relationship that the Department of Home Affairs does recognise. So I thought I'd mention that as well, because this can happen when people, are here on student visas for many years, and then they go on to a 485 visa, and then even potentially a 482 visa. That partner visas do become an option, and partner visas, give you a little bit more control because you're not waiting for an invitation. under skilled migration or looking for an employer to sponsor you, it's a process that you can drive if you are in a relationship with an Australian. Okay. Well, I think I might have done quite a bit of talking at this stage, but I thought I'd open it up to any questions that people have, and or if there are any scenarios that people want to run through that we can use it as examples.
There's a question on the chat box if you want to review that.
Okay.
Sorry, what question was that on the chat box?
So the question was, is there any way we can find employers who are willing to sponsor, or does it totally depend upon them?
It's a good question. It really does depend on the employer. The government doesn't release a list of employers that are approved standard business sponsors. And it's really a matter of raising that with the employer when you're speaking to them. Now, what that can mean is that if you need sponsorship, that can mean that an employer could need education about what does that involve if they haven't done it before. And we're always very happy to speak to employers to just explain the process to them. And that's a free service we offer with no obligation, because I don't believe that it's a very onerous process. And I think that if the employer wants to employ you, then it's an easy process to go through. But it will be something that you'll have to raise with the employer at a certain stage. And it can sometimes mean that you have to market yourself a little bit harder to the employer, because there will be some extra steps they'll have to go through. But it is something that with our clients, it just at some point in the recruitment process, it does come up.
And does the sponsored visa has to be in your qualification, or it can be in any other qualifications?
Well, it all depends. So what's required is for you to be eligible for a 482 visa, you have to have relevant qualifications and or work experience to the nominated occupation. So it depends on what the role is, and then it depends on what qualifications and work experience you have. So, if you've previously got work experience and a previous qualification, you might be eligible for a 482 in a different occupation than just as an accountant. If this is your first degree, then you really would be focusing on this degree to be able to be sponsored.
So Matthew, I have a question.
Yeah.
So my understanding is that the easiest thing to do when you graduate from CIHE is to get a 485, because that will give you 2 extra years, well, maybe 3 with the recent changes, right?
Yes.
And then if you were to study further to do a CA or a CPA, and you did that within the period of the 485, you could be applying for permanent residency using the 485. Is that right?
No, the 485 is not permanent residence. It's currently 2 years and hopefully 3, as you said. But that further study is going to make it easier for you to get a positive skills assessment as an accountant to then apply for the 189 or the 190. So yeah, so definitely people do take advantage of that time to study those courses so that they can meet the requirements, and also so they can get a professional qualification.
So that would be probably the quickest route in terms of securing permanent residency if you wanted to become a CA or a CPA.
Yes, definitely. If that's the path you want to take, then that is going to get you there quickest. That's right. So because you're not having to work for someone for 3 years and these sorts of things, it's going to give you more flexibility and as well as giving you that Australian professional qualification.
And then another option could be that you get the experience in the 2 to 3 years and then consider a different visa. Is that right?
That's right. Then that's when you would, that's when you would be looking at, and probably all options, but you would be looking at, okay, have I got an employer that can sponsor me? I'm going to go on to the 482 visa. Or have I received an invitation from the department, so I'm going to apply for the skilled migration visa? And they can work together next to each other. But that's the important thing for everyone to keep in mind, is whether the 485 is for 2 or 3 years in your situation, you've got to be planning coming towards the end of that 485 as to what are you going to do? What's your next step? Because you have to always hold a valid visa in Australia, and it's important that you, as early as possible, can start for planning for what happens when the 485 finishes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Does anyone else have any other questions?
Okay. I'm very happy to stay and answer questions if you do.
I have got one question. Is there any way to get PR through investment plan?
Through investment plan, did you say?
Yeah.
Okay. If you're looking at business or investor visas, which are subclass 188, they certainly do exist. And there's the 188A, B, and C visas. A is for people who have owned and operated a business for at least 2 of the last 4 years. 188B is the investor visa, where you need to show that you have a net worth of 2.5 million Australian dollars and you invest that into a complying investment for 3 years. And 188C is the significant investor visa, which is where you prove you have a net worth of $5 million and you invest that into a complying investment for 3 years. The one benefit of the 188C, or the significant investor visa, is that family members, you know, if they're able to do this, obviously $5 million is a lot of money, but if they can, parents are able to give that money to children to meet the criteria, where for the 188B, you have to show that you have generated those assets yourself. So we have a number of students whose parents have successful businesses overseas, and then they have gone for the 188C because we can prove source of funds for the parents, and then they give the children the money for the investment, and that is accepted. But they're both high thresholds in terms of money. There is another subclass 188 subcategory, which is called the entrepreneur, but that really comes down to a business plan, and this is targeted at students, but the state government of where you are, so in this case New South Wales, they would look at your business plan for a startup business that you are wanting to establish here in Sydney or New South Wales. And then if they think that there is going to be sufficient benefit to New South Wales and that business getting up and going and you being able to stay here, they can nominate you for that 188 entrepreneur visa, and there's no minimum amount of money required for that. It just depends on your business plan and how appealing that is to the New South Wales government.
Thank you.
No problem.
So one of the students has asked about any age limitations.
Yes, no, that's a really good question. Sorry, I should have brought that up. For skilled migration, all 3 of those categories, the 189, 190 and 491, you must be under 45 years of age. As you know, you get in the up to say 32 years of age, you get 30 points for age. 32 to 39, you get 25 points for age, and then 40 to 44, you get 15 points for age. So you lose points for age as you get older, but then you're probably gaining points for work experience as you get older as well. So it can even out. Now with a 482 visa, there's no age limit at all. But for the 186 visa, which is the permanent residence of employer sponsored, they also want you to be under 45 years of age. And your age is frozen the day you apply for a visa. So as long as you can submit the application the day before your 45th birthday, then that is okay.
My age didn't get frozen. I got older and older.
Okay, I can see that question on the screen. Yes, so if you're 45 or older, the 482 is an option for you, and also with a partner visa, there's no age restriction on that at all. There can be, if, let's say you get on a 482 visa and you're 45 years of age, if there is one exemption for age. If you work for that employer for 3 years, and in each of those 3 years you earn above what's called the Fair Work High Income threshold, which currently is $153,800 per annum, then you do get an age exemption and you can be sponsored for permanent residence under the 186. But you have to earn that higher salary for that to be eligible. So in most cases, it's under 45, but there is that exemption.
Hey, Matthew. If we are eligible for many occupations, can we do multiple skills assessment? Well,
you can, but you're going to reach a point where you have to decide and pick one, because I mean, I suppose you technically could submit different EOIs with different occupations, but we'd probably look to make that decision with a client of ours first and say, okay, we're going to focus on this. But technically, yes, if you meet the criteria to get a positive skills assessment in a number of occupations, you can do it. But at some point, you're going to be looking to choose one. And that can be relevant because, you know, certain occupations in IT and even as an accountant, it's quite high, the score you need to get to be invited, where there are other occupations where a lower score may receive an invitation. I saw a question that popped up there as well, that if on a 482 visa, if your occupation is on the medium to long-term list, there's no limit to how many years. It's up to 4 years, but then after that you could get another 4 years if you wanted. If your occupation is on the short-term list, then it's a maximum of 4 years you can get for the 482 visa. And I think there was a question there that was about, let me see if I can get this up. Okay. There's a question there about, if you're not officially divorced, can you do a de facto? Actually, yes. If you can show that you are living permanently apart and that the relationship has broken down, you can include the time spent with a new partner towards a de facto. You would probably, though, want to show that you are actually taking steps to get divorced, but maybe it's not finalized yet. Next question for early childcare teachers. That's more complicated. What you're probably looking at there would be a regional visa, so outside of Sydney. We're actually at the moment negotiating for a client for it's far north Queensland, but they have a migration agreement up there that allows early childcare teachers to be sponsored. You can get a 482 visa on that in Sydney, but at the moment it doesn't lead to permanent residence. So you might need to consider regional areas if that's the occupation you want to follow. Next question. Yes, okay. So Brisbane or Queensland really, and business visas. Well, it's under a skilled migration, but yeah, Queensland does offer that option. It's the only state that does. You need to buy a business, and they want you to invest around 100,000. So there's a lot of people are buying cafes, for example, and then you have to work in that business for at least a year, and then there can be a pathway that to permanent residence for you. So that and Queensland is also very happy to help people from other states come into Queensland to do that. So that's something that some people have done once they get their 485 visa, even if they studied in New South Wales. They've then moved to Queensland, they've purchased a business, they've worked in it for 12 months, and then they go on to the next stage, which does lead to permanent residence. So yeah, that's a good one that Queensland's offered. And in fact, because all the states feel that they're competing to get the best, migrant settlement outcome, they're very happy to encourage people to come from other states and settle in Queensland and do that. So yes, that is an option for people. Okay, I can't see anything else in the chat. Were there any more questions people wanted?
Hi, Matthew. Is it can I talk about it's different than accounting? Is it fine if it's related to the other subject?
Yeah, sure. Let's see where we go.
Yeah. So is there a PR in ECT, like early childcare teacher?
No, not straight away. So and most of the options for early childhood teachers are in regional areas, so not Sydney. So and that can be based around employer sponsored options, but some 491 options. So that if you wanted to go into more detail about that, you're welcome to contact me. But it is harder, either skilled migration or employer sponsored in Sydney in that occupation.
Okay, so thank you so much, Matthew. Every time I hear you, I learn something new. And this is an ever-changing area, and you're always on top of the law. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And what I'll do is if you'd like me to, I can send your details on to the students. And thank you so much, everyone, for attending.
Thanks everyone for attending, and I hope you found it useful. But watch this space, because there are a lot of changes going on, not just with the border, but also I think some things that will benefit international students and 485 visa holders. So keep an eye out, because there could be some real positive news there soon, hopefully. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.